So his presentation is titled Economic Considerations for Small Farm Irrigation, and I will let you take it over.
Thank you, Anita. And just holler, I guess, if you're unable to hear anything or see anything like it should be. But I'm gonna try and kind of just go through some of the things that I've observed on different operations, small farm operations around the state, some of the irrigation systems in play, and uh, go over, I guess, some of the challenges they've had. I know the costs are all over the board on there. I'll try to give a few numbers. I know that was kind of what Anita wanted and some people are looking for, but we'll try to go through some of this and look at some of the different things. But obviously, there's a lot of considerations. I think when we think of irrigation, it's not just the irrigation as well, but sometimes it can also be tied to, like here with the plastic, the moisture retention as well as weed control on the small scale. And over here on our grapes, we have the drip coming down here. What's the implications for that in terms of what's going on in the rows there? There's a lot of things going on. And anyway, I don't have as much detailed data like Dia has, and that's really good and exciting to see all the things that he's got going and working on there. But mine is more, for the most part, more observation. But I guess one of the things I'd note kind of out the gate, and I learned this growing up irrigating as well too, was basically the profit was in the hands of the one who has the hose or the one who does the irrigation, because on the irrigation, too little water could really have consequences for on total yield, as well, especially on the quality degradation with some of the small grains we had. I know some people would not do that cost of that last irrigation, and they paid for it in the quality, even though that their yield could have been there. And probably more importantly, though, was with flood irrigation was especially with crops getting established, uh, it really could ruin the crop there. And even in some of the plots we did here on one of the farms in Mesa there, irrigation was one of the things, the wild cards that was, I think, throwing some of the things off that we were expecting with regards to added amendments there. So irrigation is really key to the overall profitability, hands down. And that's one reason why people are willing to pay a lot for sprinkler systems and drip systems and everything, as opposed to just doing flood. But also, flood is not necessarily cheap either. But just in its most basic form here, I guess I give an example here of Rachel here. She's kind of the hero out there. She's just getting started here, but in the Phoenix area with a little lighthouse farm. Uh, she's lived on that property her entire life, but and gardened there a long time, but just recently started taking some things to market here. Probably has about like a half an acre, but she does a lot of her watering just with the hose and buckets right now, she says. And she plans to kind of transition into more automated systems. But I guess the point is getting started out. I think it's important to think about getting your market established before you maybe invest in a 20-year drip system, just because you don't know how committed you might be to it and how things are going to go in your market here. One of the things she had just at the Good Food Finder or Good Food Forum here uh, recently here in Tucson. This is what her table was like. She did have some edible flowers there. It's not a very big bag here for $12, but this is the kind of crops and things where they're really unique, where you can, potentially make some money, especially with high value water costs. She's just paying city water costs. But this here method here really fits in with the saying that the gym coach had with my boys when they were going to school. He used to always say, you know, we eat too much and move too little. But if you really want to get yourself fit here, this is type of system to consider because the healthcare on it could be beneficial for all of us. I know, and she's doing organic methods and free range and looking at getting certified organic as well. This is kind of basic irrigation here. This is from Michael here up on the Hopi, but uh, if you can ever take advantage of some low-hanging fruit where you can get runoff from other areas down here, that's another form of irrigation as well. Obviously, we don't have very control in terms of when it's occurring, when it's happening, but we, I mean, he's probably in this environment here, what he says, you know, maybe there's like 8 or 9 inches of rain per year. Well, I mean, he's probably more than doubling that by just collecting all the runoff here that comes in when the monsoon storms there and fills in to water their for his crops there. So that's another form of irrigation to think about. Right here, I've broken things down in terms of irrigated acres by state. I know Dia had some map there that kind of put a lot of that in perspective as well, but I thought it might be good to just look at this here. In the US, we have about 55.9 million acres that are irrigated. That's about 6.4% of all the cropland acres in the US. And you can see sprinkle is actually the most common at the US level there. But it varies greatly by region. And you can see California is by far not by far, but it's the largest in irrigated acres. It's by far the largest in terms of total water use because it uses a lot more per acre than in Nebraska. But uh, these four states here, California, Nebraska, Arkansas, and Idaho, account for like 42% of all the US irrigated acreage there. And Arkansas, obviously, it's going to a lot of crops like rice, cotton, almost all pretty much gravity. There, California is the highest in terms of having drip here. If we go over to this column over here on the drip side, I think we see the states that have the high value agriculture here. California, down here in Florida, where we have a lot of vegetables. You don't think of, you know, Florida needing a lot of irrigation, but Florida has more irrigated acres than Arizona. And this percentage of drip here, as well as the percentage of sprinkler, is somewhat related to the value of the crop, although pretty much everything like in Kansas is center pivots on well, of course, as it is in Nebraska. And Arizona, we have a lot gravity, but a lot of that gravity is laser leveled. And we'll talk about that some. We do have some drip. A lot of this is in southeastern Arizona. Um, with some of the grapes as well as pecans and whatnot. But you know, maybe this number needs to be increased some, but there are reasons for why we have a good percentage of gravity here as well. And we'll talk about that some, but it's just kind of interesting here, just looking at some of these states across here in terms of how the mix is kind of related to the value of the crops that they have. And when we look at Arizona here in terms of crop acreage over time, our portfolio has it's gone down quite a bit. We had a couple events happen here in 1980 here in 1983. What happened in 1980? Well, in 1980, we had the Groundwater Management Act implemented, but also in 1983 here was the payment in kind program. That's been viewed as kind of the greatest debacle in farm policy because we paid farmers not to plant, and we lost a lot of our export markets from that. And that was actually under the Reagan administration with Block. but the PIC program was disbanded shortly after that, and of course producers responded as well by planting more acreage here. But you can see we've increased our vegetable acreage here over the last 50 years. We just had about 6% of our portfolio in the 70s, up to around 14%. And also in terms of our other crops, we've increased that a fair bit here as well, equally about along there with vegetables. And a lot of that's been driven by the nut crops here. Probably the biggest change in our acreage, though, has been a shift from cotton to alfalfa and forage. And forage accounts for right now about, almost half of our crop acreage there in terms of that goes to hay as well as corn silage. So you can see these are not necessarily high value crops or candidates for, probably drip irrigation as much as like in California where you have grapes, you have almonds. I mean, California has, like what, 900,000 acres of grapes and a little bit more of that of almonds. So, right there, you've got high value crops that are good candidates for a drip irrigation there. This here shows a dot map here in terms of our irrigated acreage here. And you can see, I mean, California shining out there, Arkansas, Nebraska, and Idaho, those top four states having that irrigated acreage here. Each dot here is 10,000 acres. So you can see most of the irrigated acreage here in Arizona is in southern Arizona. There's not a whole lot in northern Arizona. I know, indeed, your county, we're targeting that. So I guess think of the acreage up there is probably more on a smaller scale and looking more at higher value crops as well. Although there is around the Taylor area, most of it's currently just pasture hay. This here shows kind of the state of the art in terms of our gravity fed system here, where we have laser leveled irrigation. This is a, a tractor and a machine here with a transponder trying to put the fields on level. I guess one of the advantages, of course, of this system here is that once your field is somewhat leveled, it has to be shaped every few years, and the cost of that is, not totally insignificant. Because if you're planing, like every, third year even or so, you're probably going to have, $30 an acre there in that expense. But one of the things about this system is that you can apply large heads of water here, like this is on the Gila River here tribe, and push the water out fairly rapidly. But here again, here you have, as you can see here with the furrow here, one thing to note is that we have about the same amount of soil showing all the way down here, which is indicating that, it is level, that water doesn't lie there. And we also have another smaller turnout method over here for when the seedlings are just getting established. This is alfalfa here, and this is a former cotton field here, getting ready for cotton. But I guess one of the things that I grew up with was like flood irrigation. It wasn't quite like this, though, in the sense that typically we had a ditch down the middle, and then we would have to put dams in the middle of the ditch, and then put the water going out on either side, both sides most of the time. So that really made a challenge here, because if you've ever tried to walk on a plowed field like this here, what happens? You basically sink down to the plow level. So we'd try and walk along the ditch here, where when the water was this side. If you were on the other side where there was water, then you could walk in the bottom. But when you talk about exercise, I mean, I guess that was high labor, but really keeping you going there. So I know a lot of people probably don't know this song here, but there is an economic component here to it. But this is what it felt like when you're walking down the ditches there. And Carole King there on the piano. But I feel the sky tumbling down. Yeah, so you would really feel the earth move under your feet there. But one of the things this, Carole King was had these hits almost like 50 years ago. But one of the things that was interesting, I found in an interview she had with Letterman, she was talking about how they had just started around this time introducing advances for the next album, and just to give you how things had changed so much in the last 50 years, it's almost kind of like NFL salaries. The amount that she said she got for her van advance, you probably couldn't guess, but it was 25, just $25, you know. So I mean, when you think of the number of hits she's had and everything like that, I mean, it's just a totally different era back then than it is now. And I think also in terms of when we think of just like our food, in terms of maybe what people are willing to pay now versus back then, it's a different era. Probably not quite at the same level, but it is a different era. This here shows some surface water up here in the Verde Valley, where they're taking water into the canal here, and they also had those some high tunnels here. This is the Harringtons there, and then they had a drip system installed here, and they have a micro tunnel inside the high tunnel here, just for frost protection there at the time. But they actually had some in their gravity system. They had this old canal here, and you can see the cement ditch here doesn't last forever. So they were getting a cost share on putting this pipe in with NRCS, and that is what they were doing. And this type of system here can work pretty well in terms of gravity for them in a small farm like that, irrigating their orchard out here, and some of the hay they had a lot of pasture as well for horses that they brought in, they still bring in. But this pipe is not cheap, but it's very permanent as well, even compared to the ditch here. So this is another method that is out there, and if you're under the right situation, you could really take advantage of that. But most people don't have that kind of surface water. But this is also in the Cottonwood area there, or by further downstream on the Verde there. This is off of Clear Creek here, but Ignacio there, he actually takes the water from the Clear Creek, and then he takes it to the fish pond and then to the grapes. And looking here, Isaac did some work here as well, just looking at, what was the difference in yield in terms of that was just irrigated with the ditch water versus which also had the pond water, because the pond water had fish in it as well as ducks and other activities to generate kind of fertilizer that would then be put out into the soil. That difference, and there was a significant difference here in the yields. You can see in terms of the kilograms per hectare here, not quite double, but it's a good 60% more there in terms of having that. Plus, I guess also when you think of what people are willing to pay for in terms of kind of the recreation side, this provides some opportunities with the water that don't necessarily exist elsewhere. And even if you just look at like NFL salaries 50 years ago versus today on the recreation side, there's a huge difference there. On the center pivot sprinkler irrigation, this is just a standard size pivot here shown. Dia, talked about several different versions of that and everything, which is great. But and this varies depending on the make and model and everything. But typically for you're just kind of standard pivot there, you're looking typically around $80,000 for 160 acres there. And I guess also that would say that that doesn't irrigate the whole a quarter section either. That's probably more like about 135 acres there. So you know that's around $600 per acre there. Just getting the the sprinkler, not considering the well pumps and other things that would go into that. Um, I guess the one thing that you didn't mention is that in southeastern Arizona, some people feel that the pivot does allow them to create kind of like a microclimate there so that they're able to get some better yields, especially with the corn there. Obviously, the evaporation with the wind is something there, but in some places there's the cost of irrigating the corner areas, especially in Idaho, where they have like potatoes and whatnot. They'll put the corner pivots on to try to minimize the amount of area that's lost there on that. And also, I guess I'd just also note too. I know one producer, he bought his own pivot as opposed to taking the NRCS. And you might wonder why he didn't try to go through NRCS. And he said, well, with NRCS, they basically told me that I was losing some of my water right. I didn't want to give that up. So, I mean, there are a lot of considerations with regards to a sprinkler method in terms of water, especially when you're dealing with like NRCS. Are you going to have to give up any of your water right or not? And take that into consideration. When you think about change here, this just shows how center pivots here in Saudi Arabia started, just getting started here in 1988. And then if we go about 25 years later in 2012, you could see all the pivots they had there. Um, the thing though that they realized is that they were really taking into their their domestic kind of groundwater supply because obviously they don't get a lot of rain there. So they basically kind of outlawed a lot of those, and that's one of the reasons why we've seen Saudi Arabia pick up a lot in terms of its alfalfa exports. If we look at uh, alfalfa exports by country from the U.S. going to other areas, you can see this gray area here, Saudi Arabia. Uh, Around here, they had a mandate here to reduce a lot of their alfalfa here towards 2020 and then more by 2030. And you can see Saudi Arabia is one of the larger customers here for the US here in terms of alfalfa, because that's largely what they were using their pivots here for growing. This is a fixed sprinkler system here, kind of like on a small scale in pecans down here in Pomerine, down by Benson. And on Harold's place here, he has pecans, he has some horse pasture and whatnot. Um, and he's got his well there. He's got controllers in here and different valves where he sets off for the different zones, and also able to inject fertilizer, nutrients in and whatnot. I mean, I think he's probably got about uh, uh, and he didn't. I don't have details from him on everything, and this is was put in probably about. I think it's almost been most of it about 10 years ago, but he got well over probably $2,000 to $3,000 an acre from what I calculated in terms of his cost of getting this set up here. So I guess what makes it ideal is that he's able to, minimize his labor costs. He's able to irrigate everything that he has. So he has a smaller scale, so it's important for him to irrigate all of his acreage. And he's and also is expanding another zone. This is part of his product that he's just selling out here on the road, where he just has a self-checkout, put your money in the jar there for some of his pecans there. So I guess part of the challenge here is once you move from surface to sprinkler to drip, uh, you really need more of a crop value to kind of pay for it. When we think of surface drip irrigation, I know Dia talked some about subsurface drip irrigation. I haven't seen that much in small scale farms just because of the equipment needed to put it under the ground. And most of the farms seem to get by with just putting it on top, although it may be covered by frost cloth or different things. But I guess one thing to point out here on the left here is that Eric here, he has a large main go on both sides. So he has a valve go through all so that he can better equalize the pressure here due to the run that he has. Um, he'll run pressure through from both sides, so he gets better uniformity. Most producers don't do that, but you know, it, that is something that will make a little bit of a difference there. Typically, though, um, you're looking probably just for the drip tape and a little bit of main lines, 1,300 to maybe even up to $5,000 per acre there. If it's on a smaller area by per square foot, some I've seen some lower, 25 cents and whatnot, but some will quote up as high as $3 per square foot as well. And I think part of that's just whether it includes labor or not in there. The pump and well costs are also something that's pretty significant. If you have that, like Eric here, he's just hooked into the city water. And then, of course, then he's paying the price for the city water. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But city water is not cheap, as we all know. Other thing, backflow prevention, and also with organics as well, not being able to run acid through the lines, that can pose a bit more of a challenge than just a conventional where you can run sulfuric acid through there. And rodent issues are something that in some areas is always out there. Rodents can be an issue with flood as well, like on the Gila River there where they have those terraces. The rodents are a huge problem there as well, but they're also a problem with drip in many areas here. This is an operation down by Benson that's totally off grid and uses surface drip irrigation here. This just shows a little bit of what he has some onions here, but I know he's since he's totally off grid, he got some lithium batteries here, and he's got just $20,000 invested in his lithium batteries. So he's on like 4 acres and has about 2 acres of production. So you can see right there, just with his lithium batteries, he's got $10,000 an acre. So, you know, he's got to be committed to that for a few years. He figures he can get, 10 years out of him, 7 to 10 years. So he doesn't have an electric bill, but he does have other costs, especially in terms of batteries, solar panels as well. And then he's got uh, uh, electrical things that he has to deal with as well. But here's the injection system as well that he has for putting nutrients in. And for controllers, he just basically has kind of like an Ace Hardware thing to redirect the water to the different lines. So, you know, uh, not that expensive on that end, but when you start looking at everything from the batteries in particular through, it starts to add up in your cost fairly quickly. Also, he has some storage that he's working on because since he is off grid, he needs to have water available because what happens if you don't have water when you need it, your whole crop can suffer and go bad in just a short time. So he's looking at having some storage there out to where he would always have something available in case his power goes down. And this was his shining star here, this over here, what he called this, I believe, a zebra radish here, because he was getting $7 a pound for those this year. And that was, something unique that he was selling to the select restaurants, as well as some of the farmers markets. And, but like he said, he could only move probably, 300 or 400 pounds like that. And it, he was also, commenting how keeping ahead of the weeds was an issue this year because labor was one of his biggest challenges that he was having. This just shows again uh, growing here with drip under the plastic here and using it to kind of help retain some of that moisture that's under the plastic, as well as have some for weed control. And here's also some shading that is there. Also, I bring this picture out just to note that here, even on Eric's case here, where he primarily does drip, he also does sprinkle here, especially for getting something started. And this is just an example here how he's just tapped into the main line and just runs that around there. So he can sometimes sprinkle some things up so he gets a good uniform stand here. And that's key to yield is getting a good stand where you don't have missing spots in there. Also here, just note that in the high tunnel there, he uses hand watering here with the hose here. So, there's all kinds of different methods that tend to get utilized on small farm operations, and it's not typically just one that fits everything. With regards to the valves, I know I showed some that were automated, but some people just prefer the manual there, especially if they have enough labor to manhandle them and they have fairly large runs, like as in this case, so that they can be on for a while. So again, just kind of a preference and just what kind of labor that you have there. This is some small scale stuff that was, some of this was in central Arizona here, but you can see they just have put in the drip tape around there, as well as some protection there from critters getting in on as they get their seed established. And this is actually up at Tonalea up here, just getting started with putting some basic drip lines in and valves here. Kind of the most simplest way approach you can take. Just have some manual valves to turn on and off there to get going. One of the things to note here, though, is water cost at the margin, because while most of these operations are looking at grossing, probably at least $60,000 an acre uh, to make it on just a 1 to 2 acre operation. You have to also think though about water, how much that adds up to be if you're on city water at the margin. $3.07 per 1,000 gallons is $1,000 an acre foot. And some city water, I know even here in Tucson, maybe not in Phoenix, but here in Tucson, you can easily get up into that $7 to $9 per 1,000 gallons of water per on your costs there. So that's almost like $3,000 an acre foot. So even in vegetables where you're putting drip on, you're probably going to be using 3 to 4 acre foot over the year. So that can easily run up to 10 to $12,000 there, just in your water cost. And then you have all the labor costs associated with everything as well. And labor tends to be by far the highest cost in all this. And if you can keep your water down, especially if you're starting to use a lot more water where you're getting into that higher cost range, that's going to really help make it work. And the operations that seem to be able to stick it out the most or really have a really unique market situation, or they have a good water cost situation. I think of Clyde Gable up out of Gaicelia. He's got basically like an artesian well there where he does stone fruits and whatnot. Uh, he'll probably be one of the last to be growing just because his water cost is so low. Here, just showing again how putting the drip under the frost cloth here works good for protecting those plants when they're getting going. You're protecting the plants from the wind, from some of the insects, as well as keeping that moisture retained there so it just doesn't dry out when the wind comes along there. This is here is up by Dewey up here, Mortensen's, just strawberries that are out there. I guess one of the things to keep in mind is that in most of the small scale agriculture here, you really need to get top price for your product. Even if it's a U pick here, strawberries at $3 a pound. Well, I mean, you can probably go in the store and buy them, for less than that many times. But you got to be able to get that price that's good there in order to be able to probably make it. You're not going to be able to you know, compete by just selling kind of the same experience and everything that the store has. Here, the idea is you have an experience here when you're picking your strawberry, kind of back to that entertainment idea and education idea that people can be willing to pay for. Not everybody, but some. And I guess here, just note again that the markets and labor are key to the economics here. When you think about setting up for like a farmer's market like this here, what time do they have to get up in the morning? They're getting up at like 2 to 3 a.m. so they can pick, wash, prepare everything to get to the market by 8 a.m. So that takes dedicated labor, and not all hired labor is really that dedicated in order to get your product showing out there at the market by 8 a.m. So another thing to keep in mind. This here, of course, shows the farm store here in Mesa, Schultz. He's right next to the his farm store there. He does deliver around elsewhere as well to some restaurants and some markets. But he is selling some right there at his farm store, for pretty good price here in the box lettuce that he has there. So this gives him the ability to kind of pay for some of the city water costs that he has there by getting top dollar market for what he has there. This is operation here just out of Florence. These here are some starts here. Notice they have the above kind of sprinkle irrigation here on these starts to get them going. This is going to be selling those there. This was the sweet corn that they were going to have coming there. What was interesting about this farm here was the EC value that we had in terms of testing on this. They were like, we thought over the line in terms of what would be growing good, but the corn seemed to be doing fine here. Also, this is just a thing we've heard of, farm to table, farm to plate, almost everything. But also this is a term here I saw the other day, farm to terminal. So, the market side is something that everyone's getting an angle on, and is one of those factors there that does help turn the economics there. This is an operation down in southeastern Arizona, uh, quite a bit south of Wilcox there. And on the cones there, they had drip irrigation, but basically their soils got too acidic. They just couldn't grow anything. So what they did was they went and they put some pivots on, and they put cover crops on and started growing this here, and then doing what they kind of has been referred to as like regenerative agriculture. So they had the cattle in there. So these cattle move every day here. They move from 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 one spot to the next spot there. So how alkaline your soil is going to often determine, like Dia was talking about, you have to have some leaching most of the time on your soil. So the water quality is another thing that's going to be there. So keep in mind here that if your water is greater than like 2.5 decisiemens per meter, or your soil greater than 3, there, you're probably gonna have some challenges there with drip in particular. And one of the things I always found interesting about drip when I first came to Arizona was that when they had cantaloupes under drip for several years out there, all of the salts tended to get pushed away from the drip line. So the Wirtz brothers, when it started to rain, that was when they had to have the drip lines everywhere on so that keep those salts out. Otherwise, the rainwater would push the salts back into their melons and kill the crop. So there are, some things that I guess that really have to be managed closely when you're dealing with specialty crops or high value and drip irrigation. So just to kind of summarize, your profit definitely is tied to the irrigation. Uniform irrigation, that's going to give you good yields and uniform quality. When you have water and soil salinity above, 7.5, you're also going to have some issues in terms of micronutrients not being available. And Debonker maybe will talk more about that. There are some trade-offs definitely between upfront investment and labor, the yield, water savings, and of course the NRCS cost share is a big deal. Beginning farmers can qualify for up to like a 90% cost share. So that's huge, but have to keep in mind they don't necessarily pay for everything that it takes to install. Like they uh, don't pay for necessarily your lithium batteries or other things like that. And also, it was kind of interesting too that the individual that was off grid, he was not able to get an NRCS contract because NRCS said that his system wouldn't deliver enough water for what they calculated was needed for his entire farm. Well, I mean, he's getting by now, but like you said, maybe once he grows everything out, maybe he won't have enough water there. But there are some hurdles that have to be cleared in terms of getting the NRCS cost share. Um, you know, First, I think, look at how you can grow your markets before you fully invest everything on your whole operation into a 20-year irrigation system. Uh, because these are long-term investments. Unless you can develop a market that's going to be profitable and you have the labor force to see it out through to like 20 years, you probably shouldn't do it, just because what is the salvage value on a drip system that's sitting out there in your field? It's not a lot. I mean, most people are probably not going to want to go out there and pick up your drip tape and take it elsewhere. So keep that in mind. And probably one of the biggest challenges with regards to just irrigation in Arizona, especially with flood irrigation, is that your excess percolation is, likely another person's future water, but they don't necessarily pay you for it or have the ability or even the mechanism to pay you for it. But when we think of like, the lining the canal in Florence there, well, basically that's going to take away from a lot of the groundwater after that's lined that other people take out in the community. So uh, with that, I'll end. And if there's any questions, I'll I'll stop share so maybe I can see anybody. Sarah, okay. Oh, hopefully I didn't go mute at any point.
Oh, no, you're great. And is there any questions in the audience?
Hi, Anita. This is Jan.
Hi, Jan.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. I had a couple questions for Russell. Um, and I'm sorry if you hit these. I had to jump off and be on another meeting. But my first one was for land leveling. How often should you do that? And then my second question was, I've been getting quite a few new customers in the Taylor Snowflake area. And what they've been doing, they're taking um, rangeland and they're converting it over to cropland. And they're thinking about doing some type of irrigation in the future. And with NRCS, we have to have that 2 out of 5 year irrigation history. But I was just kind of wondering, as a new farmer in that particular area, and they've got raw land that they're working with, what would jump out as which way would you kind of direct them on the best type of irrigation system to go to? And these would be people that have relatively level land. Um, uh, and what I first thought about was the drip system, but then, we've got the rodent issue. So I'm thinking, well, that might not be the best choice. But I guess in your opinion and your background, if you were working with somebody brand new and they've got fresh land that they've converted over from range to crop, what would be, I guess, an optimal irrigation system for them that's water efficient?
Yeah, well, I think some would probably depend on what they're growing. I mean, if they're just doing pasture and hay, I mean, flood irrigation tends to be the default. I mean, it's very forgiving in many ways. Uh, it, if you aren't able to get water on it right away or too much water later, but some of the land that I showed you there was right next to rangeland, and that was on drip there where they were growing vegetables. Um, I guess the other thing is to what is the water right that you have, I guess, and are you able to, use that to expand into the non-irrigated land as well. That's another legal issue that I would look into first as well. Because you might think nobody's watching, but the people are watching
Yes.
on satellite in particular. So yeah, so I mean, before they invest in a whole irrigation system, I'd make sure that they have that cleared up first off, I guess. Yeah.
And if they had some vegetables, possibly using a drip system for that, maybe like a half acre or so of just vegetables.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I would, I mean, drip is going to get them by far the most probably bang for their buck on their water, I would think. Yeah, because sprinkle is probably not going to be any more. Uh, it would be probably just about as much cost in my view, and probably not going to be as water efficient. Yeah.
Can we add to that water quality, right? Like if you have salinity issues, this would, for example, eliminate the drip if
Yeah,
it's
no, you're right.
too
You're right. That's the other thing. Yeah, have them test what their soil is. But if they're in the Taylor area, they're probably pretty good, I'm guessing. Um, Maybe not, but southeastern Arizona is where the biggest problem areas are, I think, in terms of high EC values. But central Arizona too has its fair share as well.
We've had a couple of our soil scientists go out there and they would do the EC and the pHs. And I know the pHs are like in the eights. So if they were running like a center pivot irrigation, that would help, I guess, help with the pH. And I know with the EC, it would definitely help.
Although it depends on the water too, right?
Okay.
Yeah, I know some people have had drilled wells and had to use the city water just because the water was too salty. That's
Okay.
actually Eastern Arizona, yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think the the basic soil and water tests are probably pretty mandatory, I think, for getting a feel for some areas anyway.
Okay. And then for land leveling, like I've had a couple of customers actually leveled the fields, and personally, I had not was not familiar with land leveling coming from a flat area of the country. But how often do you need to like renovate that at some point, or is it kind of good for multiple years?
Well, I mean, the argument is that once you do the major leveling, that's done forever. I
Okay.
mean, like I mean, just the terraces like they did in Gila River, you can see going down the freeway there. There's some major dirt move there. But of course they have to reshape that, every 2 to 3 years or so, depending on what crops they're growing and how they're doing things. But the argument is it's not going to wear out like a, a center pivot would in the future, and but I guess in order to make the system work though, too, you need a large head of water to be able to flood there. So,
Okay.
if it's to the point where they can't get a large head of water, that's where the sprinkler and drip come in to be more of a viable alternative there.
Okay. Great. Well,
That
thank you
that's
for
I mean, that's the one thing I learned in all my irrigation was that, I mean, if I had 6 cubic feet of water, I could irrigate a lot. But if we got water ration where we could only had like about an acre and a half, 2 feet, man, it was just like painful trying to get across the ground. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, great. Okay. Thank you for responding.